If you grew up believing that buying a home was a natural step in life, something you would eventually achieve after school, after your first job, after a few years of saving, then today's reality can feel confusing, even discouraging. Because for many young Americans, the idea of owning a home no longer feels like a milestone. It feels like a distant goal, one that keeps moving further away no matter how hard they try. This shift didn't happen overnight. It's a result of long-term economic changes that have quietly reshaped the housing market over decades. And the truth is, young Americans aren't failing to buy homes. The system has made it significantly harder for them to do so. One of the biggest reasons is the rising cost of homes compared to income. Over the past several decades, home prices in the United States have increased at a much faster rate than wages. According to data from sources like the U.S. Census Bureau and housing research groups, the median home price is now several times higher than the median household income. In the past, a home might have cost around 3 times a household's income. Today, in many markets, that ratio is closer to 6 or even higher. This matters because affordability isn't just about how much money you make, it's about how far that money can go. When home prices rise faster than wages, it creates a gap. And that gap becomes a barrier that keeps people from entering the housing market. Even if someone is earning more than previous generations did at the same age, they may still find themselves unable to afford a home because prices have grown even faster. Then there's the issue of down payments. Buying a home isn't just about being able to afford monthly payments. It requires a large upfront investment. Traditionally, buyers are expected to put down around 20% of the home's price. On a $400,000 home, that's $80,000. For many young people, saving that amount of money is extremely difficult, especially when they are also dealing with rent, student loans, and everyday living expenses. And that's the second major pressure point: rent. For a growing number of young Americans, renting is no longer a temporary phase. It's a long-term reality. In many cities, rent has increased significantly over time. According to recent housing data, renters in certain age groups spend a large portion of their income on housing, sometimes exceeding recommended financial guidelines. When so much of your income goes toward rent, there is very little left to save for a down payment. This creates a cycle. You need savings to buy a home, but you can't save because your cost of living is too high. So you stay renting. And while you're renting, you're paying for housing without building ownership or equity. In other words, you're funding someone else's investment instead of your own. At the same time, mortgage interest rates have added another layer of difficulty. In recent years, interest rates have risen from historic lows to much higher levels as central banks responded to inflation. Even a small increase in interest rates can significantly impact monthly mortgage payments. This means that even if someone finds a home they can afford at today's prices, the cost of borrowing money to buy that home is much higher than it was just a few years ago. When you combine high home prices with higher interest rates, the monthly cost of owning a home can become overwhelming. And when ownership becomes more expensive than renting in many cases, people delay buying altogether. But the problem isn't just about housing prices and interest rates. It's also about income. Wages have not kept pace with housing costs. While incomes have increased over time, they haven't increased at the same rate as home prices, rent, or other essential expenses. This creates a mismatch. Even if someone is earning more money than previous generations did at their age, they still may not be able to afford a home because the cost of living has grown even faster. This is especially important for younger workers who are just starting their careers. Early in life, incomes tend to be lower. At the same time, this is the stage where people are expected to start saving for major life goals like buying a home. But if most of their income is going toward rent, debt, and basic living costs, there's very little left to build a financial foundation. Student loan debt is another major factor. Many young Americans graduate with tens of thousands of dollars in student debt. Monthly loan payments reduce how much they can save and limit how much they can afford to borrow for a mortgage. Lenders also consider existing debt when deciding whether to approve a loan, which means student loans can directly impact a person's ability to qualify for a home. In addition to that, everyday expenses have increased. Healthcare costs, transportation, insurance, groceries, these are all part of the financial equation. When these costs rise, they leave less room for saving and investing. For many young people, financial stability itself becomes a priority, pushing homeownership further into the future. Another important factor is the housing supply. In many parts of the United States, there simply aren't enough homes available to meet demand. When supply is limited and demand is high, prices naturally increase. This is a basic principle of economics. In cities where jobs are concentrated and people want to live, housing becomes even more competitive. Developers have not built enough housing in many of these areas to keep up with population growth, which has contributed to rising prices. This shortage is not just a short-term issue. It has developed over many years, influenced by zoning laws, construction costs, population shifts, and economic policies. The result is a housing market where there are more buyers competing for fewer homes, driving prices even higher. There's also a psychological and cultural shift happening. For previous generations, buying a home was often seen as an expected part of adulthood. It was a symbol of stability and success. But for many young Americans today, that expectation feels less realistic. Some have even begun to question whether they will ever be able to afford a home. This creates a sense of uncertainty about the future. Instead of planning for homeownership, many young adults are adapting to a different reality, renting longer, sharing housing, or exploring alternative living arrangements. This shift changes how people think about success. If owning a home feels out of reach, then the definition of financial success itself begins to change. People start focusing more on flexibility, mobility, and immediate financial stability rather than long-term ownership. But even with all these challenges, the core issue remains the same. The gap between what people earn and what it costs to buy a home has grown too wide. This gap is not the result of individual failure. It is a result of structural changes in the economy. Housing markets, wage growth, interest rates, and financial systems have all evolved in ways that make homeownership more difficult to achieve than it once was. At the same time, the emotional impact of this reality cannot be ignored. For many young Americans, the inability to afford a home creates a feeling of being left behind. It can feel like the rules have changed after they started playing the game, and that can be deeply frustrating. But understanding why this is happening is the first step toward navigating it. Because once you recognize that the issue is systemic, not personal, you can start to shift your perspective. You can begin to focus on what you can control, your financial habits, your saving strategy, your decisions, rather than blaming yourself for circumstances that are largely out of your control. In the end, the question is not just why young Americans can't afford homes anymore. The deeper question is how the system evolved to create this situation in the first place, and what it will take to adapt to a new reality where home ownership is no longer guaranteed, but something that must be carefully planned, strategically approached, and patiently pursued. Because the dream of owning a home hasn't disappeared, but the path to achieving it has changed. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe and join us because we're breaking down the systems, habits, and hidden truths that shape your money, your future, and your freedom. Don't just watch the game, learn how to win it.